But let's start here with something I don't particularly love. Of all the arguments you've heard me make on this show, I think the one that's most disturbing to me is how our government is unmoored from the body politic. This is true on taxes, healthcare, education, trade deals, foreign policy, and policing. Yes, you can choose Pepsi and Coke, but on the choices that substantively affect your life, what the public wants is nearly irrelevant. You have a Frankenstein government. That should bother you. When Obama is telling the American public that he's not having troops on the ground while spending billions of dollars to try to take down the government, killing 500,000 people, those were real people. That should bother you. Black Lives Matter has received the limelight in light of the mass protests, here and for that matter, abroad. One key demand: defund the cops. Now, Joe Biden hears the call. He is, after all, king of blacks, and he runs to the first black church he can find, lies about his work in the civil rights movement, advises cops to shoot people in the leg instead of the chest, and calls $300 million more to the police budget. Now, understand how ridiculous this is. New York, in and of itself, one state, has a budget of $600 billion. But yeah, Joe Biden, keep going with the performative dancing. What about Trump? Trump is president, after all. Joe Biden is just a man in his basement right now. What about Trump? Trump has been under all sorts of pressure, and he is severely at risk of losing the next presidency. Biden, like I said, has been in his basement, but he has still managed to develop and maintain a lead in nearly every national poll and swing states. The public blames Trump for the nearly 120,000 people dead and over 2 million people infected with COVID-19 due entirely to incompetence in preparing for the pandemic and handling its spread. He's also trying to mitigate a sharp attitude shift in regards to the public regarding Black Lives Matter, police brutality, structural racial balance in the criminal justice system against minorities, racial bias in the criminal justice system against minorities, and more importantly, the public is firmly behind the protesters. Those millions of people in the street gets like 80% support from the public. This includes, by definition, some Republicans. 40 million people are out of a job. That number is astonishing to me. With a housing apocalypse that's coming as soon as next month, the government chose to prioritize the owner class over workers and the public, allowing deep and severe economic trauma for people that were already hurting and already had nothing. Trump's presidency is at stake. He has to say something, whether he cares or not. Trump teased an executive order last week and started his press conference on his signing of that order while we were still on air, so we didn't get the opportunity to go about it in depth. I did have the opportunity to listen to the video last night and did a speech on the show very late last night. But the details are basically incentivize PD agencies, police department agencies, to adopt best practices in use of force, and share officer misconduct, and co-responder program for nonviolent calls, and ban chokeholds unless the officer's life at risk. You're going to have a lot of officers whose life at risk who ends up choking a lot of people out. That said, there's a part of the speech that warrants special attention due to the severe misunderstanding of what people want, and why this performative fart in a jar posing as an executive order on policing amounts to basically nothing. It's here to give the right-wingers a transcendently shallow talking point and to assuage some on the right that may trend towards this notion of policing, but definitely feel like something needs to be done. It's a performative gesture. Let's hear the quote, or let's hear the comment that I'm referring to, though. Let's play the clip.
The hurting families, I want you to know that all Americans mourn by your side. Your loved ones will not have died in vain.
But the president quickly turned to tough talk about law and order.
Americans want law and order. They demand law and order. Some of them don't even know that's what they want, but that's what they want.
You know, the very presence of a cop insinuates crime and concerns around the issues of safety. Otherwise, why have such a device? It's true that people would like to have their crimes prosecuted, white collar and otherwise. Basically, people want a fair and equitable society. And insofar as society is not fair and equitable, there will be proportional chaos. That applies to economic, social, and political, equality. There is nothing in the want for justice and equality that presupposes or necessitates the need for cops. Cops are only necessary in the absence of those things, which gets to my point. People don't want law and order, but they are willing to settle for law and order if they're presented with crime and challenges to their safety due to a degrading, falling apart society. One, where the governmental device doesn't prioritizes those people as being necessary or important. And so it lets those particular communities fall into disrepute. Not to mention there's some in our society that have a legacy going all the way back for 400 years, leading all the way up into the 80s and 90s, that have been somewhat abandoned. I'm making the point that basically cops are necessary because of crime. And the whole point of law and order is necessary because of issues of crime. They're not primary, is kind of my point. People are willing to settle, but it's not necessarily what they want. Law is not real. It's an artifact of having power to force and compel behavior. It also must be understood that order doesn't require justice. It only the absence of chaos. Trump could have given this speech at the height of Jim Crow, a law to hold human beings as property, with a government angry that people are aggrieved by the protesting. The key point here is, as I said, people don't necessarily want law and order, but they'll settle for it if it's presented with challenges to their safety. What they do want is peace and security. Those are different things. Issues of safety and security is drastically different than issues of law and order. And Trump's speech here fundamentally misses that point. Bob, I think that oftentimes we are so wrapped up in our capitalistic system that Trump gives a speech. Many times I hear this speech, and the speech is given with a presumption that there will be inequality because we're going to keep the money at the top. And so law and order is just part and parcel to that system, which in that case I'd somewhat agree with. But if the larger society is really looking at this and they're saying, we really do want peace and security, then you can't get that with law and order. That's something different. Law and order, you don't even have that device there if you had peace and security.
Yeah, I think I hear what you're saying, and maybe I can work through some of my thoughts of what I'm not hearing. I think I agree with you on the underlying value that humans want peace and security. I mean, the vast majority of interactions between all humans on this planet, which is incredible, are peaceful. Think about how many people you walk by when you go to the train or you go on your bike or at the grocery store. It's not like each and every one of those people you're fighting. You don't need a security guard to say like, hey, people, stay separate.
Yeah, you're not watching
I do agree with you. The majority of like human interaction overwhelmingly is peaceful. And I think we often overlook that because we do the news and it's all focused on death, destruction, and conflict, right? It's always focusing on the wars as opposed to like stable pieces or sustainability. I think for me, the law and order conversation really comes down around individualism in the United States and then the ownership of both land as well as property. And we have to remember that we live in a country that 60% of it is owned by corporations or private individuals, and there's a 65% ownership rate amongst homes. And when we've been so ingrained to think that you must protect what is yours and what you own, what is your home, what is your land, then you do need that law and order because you need to make sure no bad guy comes and takes that from you or somebody cheats you or somebody steals it from you. And that, I think, is kind of the concern. And that's what Republicans are focused on, is property and who has the right to make the decision on that space. I think for you on the other end of things, and maybe this is where you can kind of correct me, is that peace and security comes from a whole different thinking of how we orient ourselves in our societies. Yes. That if it's not about ownership, but it's about cooperation, and sharing and making sure that everyone has what they need to survive, then you're not all of a sudden having to fight over different things that are materially made to have some worth to it.
Exactly.
And I think that's a fundamental divide. And I don't think Joe Biden and the Democrats don't have that language. I don't think the Republican Party does either.
Neither does. But that's exactly right. That's why I made the argument that equitable, be it political, economic, or I think it was the third one in there. But because you need those things. If you don't have an economic system where people have the things that they need, you're going to have chaos. I mean, how could you not have chaos? People get it on somewhat of a gut level. Like, for example, outcomes. You have tragic outcomes. Either children's brain matter is less when they're in poverty. And by the way, even outcomes when the people are thrown out of their homes. Those people, and they have kids, those kids have a much harder time. Like, we have tragic outcomes that we accept in our society. I'm saying it is impossible to have a peaceful society when you have underclass, like 40%, nearly half of your population is an underclass. It's almost manic or amazing that the public would even think of having a peaceful society in that situation. Hence,
Well,
law and
I guess
order.